Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, April 21st. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families webinar series. The title of our webinar today is Moving Out, a pilot training series, Transition Planning for Supported Living. The session is being facilitated by Mary Anne Kane-Breschi, Parent and Director of Family Supports for DDA, and her special guests include Steve Blanks, Director of Partnerships at SEEC, along with his colleagues, Donne Allen, Director of Projects, Cindy Kauffman, former Director of Strategic Operations, and Jean Eisenhaur, who is both a family and SEEC Board Member and a series participant. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options for listening to the webinar by computer and phone, and you can switch in the webinar audio section. There's one handout for this presentation, which has not been uploaded yet, but I'll get to that in just a second. You can also email me if you didn't get it. We are recording the webinar, and that gets posted on the DDA website. And we'd also like to hear from you and get feedback on today's presentation and any suggestions you might have for future topics. Please use the question or chat box to the right of the webinar panel to provide that. In addition, we're interested in highlighting how people with disabilities and their families are connecting during this pandemic throughout the webinar series. If you're interested in sharing your story, please contact Mary Anne Kane-Breschi directly at mary.kane-breschi@maryland.gov or me, donna.will@maryland.gov. If you have any questions related to your family member services, please contact your local regional office. So now I'd like to introduce Mary Anne Kane-Breschi.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families, welcome to our webinar. The purpose of this webinar, this series, is to bring people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their families, and others together in order to connect, share information, share ideas, and learn from each other, all in an effort to support one another and build knowledge, skill, and resiliency within ourselves and the community as we find our way through COVID-19 and in life in general. Throughout this series, we've discussed and addressed a variety of topics and concerns with which individuals and families are facing related to COVID-19 in everyday life. And we do this with the help of invited guests and subject matter experts, and of course, through the lens of Charting the Life Course framework. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Charting the Life Course, it is a set of universal principles and tools. Its fundamental principle states that all people have the right to live, love, learn, work, and play, and pursue their aspirations in the community. It was developed by the University of Missouri, Kansas City's Institute for Human Development Family-to-Family program in order to help people with developmental disabilities and their families create a vision for a good life, think about what they need to know and do, navigate and or develop supports and resources, and finally discover what it's going to take to live their lives of their choosing and to do it. Today, we have amazing guests who are here to discuss and share their experience with assisting men and women with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families navigate the cliff of moving out of their family home using person-centered training and Charting the Life Course tools to help them make the leap safely. Join me, let me introduce you. I'd like to introduce you to Steve Blanks, Director of Partnerships with SEEC, Donne Allen, Director of Projects at SEEC, Cindy Kauffman, former Director of Strategic Operations at SEEC, and Jean Eisenhaur, both a family and board member and a series participant. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve.
Me unmute myself. Thank you, Mary Anne, and thank you, DDA and the Maryland Community of Practice for inviting us and allowing us the opportunity to share. I'm merely the gatekeeper for this awesome team of people that we're going to hear from, Cindy and Donne and Jean, who was one of the participants. So very excited to kind of share what we did, what we hope to kind of cover in about 45 minutes. I think we're going to put questions towards the end, is a little bit about kind of the background of the series, how it came about, what was the intentionality of the series, what were the components, and we definitely used the life course framework extensively through this as a skeleton to the kind of the whole movement of the series. Share a little bit about what we learned from it, and we're also going to hear throughout, this is going to be woven throughout the message, is we're going to hear from Jean, who participated as one of the pilot members and was one of our guinea pigs. Thank you, Jean. And she's going to share what her and Andy and Phil's experience was with the series, what they took away, and I think also Jean's going to share hopefully a little bit of kind of where they're at now, where they're going forward, because I think it hopefully the series launched some perspectives for her. So we'll go to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Cindy with the next slide, who's going to give us a, sorry.
For just 1 second. I need to, sorry about that.
You're okay.
There we go.
As Mary Anne's kind of moving us from slide to slide, I'm just going to bring in Cindy. Cindy's going to give us a little bit of context. This didn't just come out of the blue and generate out of nowhere. We were actually fortunate to get a grant through the SPARK exercise at the Arc of Maryland that allowed us to sort of get our brains together. And although it didn't cover all the expenses that Cindy and Donne and the time that we did it was an incredibly useful subsidy to kind of move us forward and give us the opportunity to put this series together, put the materials together, and give us the focus to move forward. So Cindy, take it away. Give us a little background of where we came from.
Cindy, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Yes, I am. And
there you go.
I am notorious for being muted and going on and on. So thank you. I'm happy to talk a little bit about the background. 4 to 5 years ago, maybe even a little bit more, in personal supports and delivering personal supports to folks. Some of those people were saying, I want to move. I want to have my own place. Families were saying, you know, it's time for my son or daughter to look at being a little more independent. And in several situations, we had a couple families that came to us and said, hey, we've already moved, but we need some more support. So we had to spend a lot of time learning ourselves how to be a good support as people were moving out. And, you know, it was a great learning curve for us. But what also happened during that time is we learned so many lessons between the families and the people we support and us that we thought it was important to start writing this down. So we developed a very early draft of what we now call the Moving Out Guide. That Moving Out Guide became our sort of template for any time we sat down with a person or their family to sort of walk through and say, these are the things we learned that are important. Getting your place first and moving out is probably not what families are telling us is a main thing to do. So we really started developing a structure. With that first draft, we were very lucky at SEEC to have a strong, what we call family think team. And that family think team are some very strong, very articulate, and sometimes quite demanding families that really help us in looking at what we're planning on doing, whether it's new documents or communication or programs. And our family think team spent a lot of time over the course of a year helping us revamp this Moving Out Guide. But then it kind of sat there after that for use with the families that we were talking to. That sort of takes us to the next step when Steve mentioned the SPARK grant, and here we took off from there.
We can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we talk a lot about in SEEC is what is our why? Why are we doing it? For the sake of what? And when we presented to the Arc of Maryland board in gaining the grant, we had to kind of present what's the purpose of this. So we found out very quickly in doing a little bit of research that there's kind of a cliff, right? We talk about the cliff when people come from school into the meaningful day or employment and going from this very structured school system to what's next. Well, there's kind of another cliff, it seems, when people are thinking about moving out. These figures represent 74% of people with IDD still living at home in the state of Maryland. So it's a lot of people still there living with their parents in their family homes, and 16,000 people who are living with caregivers over the age of 60. So we can recognize that there was a major need for understanding what it means to moving out, and this idea of a cliff, that what do I do next? And often we find that people are in an urgency situation, right? They something bad happens, and then they have to kind of move forward. So we really wanted to put together a very thoughtful, intentional planning series here to kind of get people moving forward ahead of those urgency situations. Pass to the next slide. So this is a very complicated slide, but the beauty of this is it's really just an overview. So we had, in essence, 5 sessions. So originally, when we started this off back in pre-pandemic times, PPT, we had a plan to have a series of sessions in person. We were going to do this with the families and the self-advocates together, with Cindy, Donne, and myself facilitating that group through a series of about 4 sessions over a 6-week horizon, which was the original construct of the grant. When the pandemic hit, we clearly, like everybody else, had to pivot, and we pivoted after regaining ourselves a little later to decide we could do this. We could still do this series, and we could do it virtually. So again, we were pivoting to idea of this moving out series, but also pivoting to this idea of doing it virtually. Originally, because of Donne's talents in maps, making action plans is a great graphic facilitation tool. Doing it in person was just like fabulous. We're like, this is going to be great. And we were like, how are we going to do this virtually with the visual graphic facilitation? So we had to step that back. And again, we moved into kind of more of a discussion framework, which we'll talk more about kind of the format of the series. But we had 5 sessions over the period of July through November, with a 6th session at the end, which was more of a feedback session, because this was an evaluative process from a pilot. We wanted to learn what was working, what was not working, any lessons learned from the families as well. And each of these sessions, there would be kind of pre-reading, there would be homework after the sessions, there would be goals within each of the sessions. And most importantly, again, because of the grant, we actually also relayed evaluation forms to everyone. So we wanted to realize, was this pilot working? Was it really hitting on what it is that people were trying to get to? So as you look at these sessions, we kind of built from this idea of the life course framework. We started with kind of visioning, kind of getting to the basics of who I am, and then moved through good life planning, moved into the kind of relationship building, understanding the resources we needed, and then we wrapped this up by pulling it together and developing some action plans. So not only was it theoretical and academic and educational, we also, and I think Jean can talk to this down the road, we wanted people to have some tangible walkaways, session by session, but also at the end of the whole series. So in next slide, one of the things we also wanted to do was kind of figure out where people were at. And we did a pre-survey with everybody to sort of say, how ready are you to move out? And as you can see here, the vast majority of people were kind of ready in the 1 year, 1 to 2 years. So we were hitting people who were thinking about this, really seriously thinking about moving forward, but there were still some people not ready at all. So we kind of have an array of people. Just for context, we originally asked 12 families, 11 actually participated throughout the whole series. Ironically, one of them for 2 of the sessions was in Turkey. So we kind of dealt with that virtual construct as well, which was interesting. And we, again, pre-recorded materials and recorded each of the sessions to sort of make sure that people could continue along, even if they couldn't be at all of the sessions. But this pre-survey was really important for us to kind of know what we were dealing with, where people's understanding was, how much do people know. And again, this was a great group of cohort pilot members, because they did have a solid starting point, but they knew they needed more information. Jean, do you mind just jumping in here? And we've kind of prepared this, Jean, to sort of talk and weave in here. Talk a little bit about kind of what it was that you were looking for out of the series, and kind of how prepared you were going into the series.
So having the series come along was a big help, because it's something that's been on our minds for a while, but it's one of those things that you sort of think you'll do later. So having this come up made us realize, let's sit down and, you know, with your guidance, go through the steps that we need to talk about to help Andy be ready to move out, help us to be ready for him to move out, and to just gauge where he stands, where we stand. And it was very interesting. He made it very clear he's not ready to move out, but he made it clear he would like to move into a different space in our home. So he would like to convert a room in our lower level of the house that's his special space. And so we're working toward that with him. But having this course framework to go by, it helped us be much more organized in questions being asked and answered, and coming up with things that we didn't even think of.
Great. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Donne, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the things we heard again from the pre-survey.
Yeah, so in our pre-survey, we just wanted to gauge families. Where are you right now? What is the most important to you on this journey? What are some of the things that you struggle with, or what are some of the things that you're looking forward to? And so the larger words here are things that both are struggle and stuff that, families were some of the people that we support were looking forward to. Independence being a huge one of them, but then you also have financial constraints that they were dealing with. It's like thinking about, how are we going to afford you to move out when you're currently living home with us? And then who's going to support you? Because if you're there and we're at home, that's the kind of like coming together as a family to determine what are the things that we need. And personal supports came out on top of, as one of the main concerns for families moving forward. Also, what are the legalities? What are the legal issues that we need to think about as it relates to you paying your bills, you signing a lease, and all of the wonderful things that come with moving out and just living in general. How am I going to live? Where am I going to live? Am I going to live near public transportation? Do I want a house? Do I want an apartment? All of these things are things that families were thinking about and that we needed to know prior to them coming to the table, so that we kind of had some baseline knowledge of how to deal with the cohort as a group, and then where we were going to go with them from there. Next slide.
Sure.
So this is a really cool graphic way of kind of showing how we did this. So we talked about these 5 sessions. The 5 sessions had a framework using the life course framework, which Donne is going to delve us into each of the sessions specifically. But each format, we wanted to be consistent. We wanted people to come in and understand, okay, what am I getting into? Not change it month over month. So we had a typical agenda where everyone would come in and share things that they'd been working on, things that was going on, share any of the kind of thoughts and feedback around the pre-recorded materials. We would then generally do a component somewhere around 10-15 minutes of educational, and that was again diving into the life course framework materials and really making sure that people got another thorough understanding. Now remember, generally everyone also got a pre-recorded session from Donne of the materials we're going to cover. So we've hit people up now 2 or 3 times with the same materials. Hopefully it sticks at that point. We would then go into breakouts. I think the first 2 sessions, we only had 1 breakout into the mini groups where Cindy, myself, and Donne would facilitate smaller groups. So again, we had 11 people in the series. We'd get into these smaller groups of about 3 or 4. Which I think was where the magic happened. I really believe that was kind of where people really kind of got to learn, got to share, got to be a bit vulnerable through the process and really understand how this stuff works. And then we would come back together and reflect as a group, wrap up, and then share out the homework. So that was our typical session format. They usually lasted about an hour and a half. We sometimes went a little bit longer. We did it the 3rd Thursday of the month, 5 to 6:30. So that time seemed to jive with everyone's kind of schedule. And because of the virtuality, it was easy for people to kind of show up. They didn't have to go somewhere, which made it a lot easier. On the right side of the slide, you kind of see the cycle, right? So the session would happen. It was Zoom. There would be these 3 breakouts. We would send everyone afterwards the materials again. We would send them an evaluative form that they would fill out, and all of this stuff was archived on a Google Drive, and we would actually record the sessions so people could go back and listen to them. So again, you think about the family that was in Turkey, they could listen to those sessions and understand and stay along with the path. And then 2 weeks prior to the next session, there was an email kind of suggesting what was coming up, getting the homework out to people, and there's some of that pre-reading again. So we had this cycle which people would get into. And another question for you, Jean, how did the session format work for you guys, and how did this cycle work for you guys? I know sometimes we weren't always like as efficient time-wise as we should have been. That's part of the pilot, right? But tell me a little bit how this worked for you and Andy.
I thought it worked very well because getting the homework, we knew what to expect. We knew we could already start thinking about the topic that was coming up. If it was something that might be more challenging for us, we had more time to consider it. If it was something that wasn't really as big of an issue as some other things, you know, we still knew what was coming ahead. And being online, that was a help, because I know a lot of parents are, you know, they might have an hour and a half commute. So being on Zoom was really convenient for my household. So that meant my husband, Andy, and I could be on time right at 5 o'clock, ready to go. And you're right, being in the smaller group was very helpful because you could exchange more personal details about, you know, where you are in this journey and, you know, preferences that your child might have.
I have another question for you, Jean, because again, when we originally imagined this series, we kind of almost had parallel tracks going on. There was going to be within the sessions a breakout for the families and a breakout for the self-advocates. We weren't able to do that virtually, so we didn't do it. So there was you and Phil with Andy, the most important person, together, like all of the other families. How did that work? Was that a good format for you?
Well, it worked well for us because we always had Andy sitting right in front of that camera, and he knew he was the star of the show, really. We were there as support, and we would offer our opinions and backup, but he knew this was about him and his preferences. So it did work very well. And for sometimes if parents need to fill in the gaps, where your child might not be communicating as clearly as you might wish they were, you know, having us all together, that helped, you know, fill out the story if we needed to add more details.
Jean, I love that you said that Andy was the star and he was front, because that was the one thing that I reflected on. And we didn't build this up, right? We didn't tell people you need to sit here and you need to sit here. We didn't tell anyone to do that, but it naturally over time became that whether it was Andy or Yelena or Adam, they were front and center and the families were slightly behind. And that dynamic, to Cindy and Danae, I don't know if you noticed that too, was just incredible.
Yeah, it was kind of a natural flow. I think that I'm not sure how it evolved like that. I think families just came to the table knowing that, you know, I'm not going to be the one moving out, you're moving out, and so you're going to be the one that is going to, you know, lead this charge, and I'm also going to reflect on how that impacts me. So I think it was a wonderful setup the way, and it's a wonderful. Like sometimes you think of a pandemic and you think of all of the tough things that we're going through, but I think that, you know, there are small gems that you can find. And I think us pivoting into virtual in this way was really a small gem that we found that kind of worked really well for families, and they were able to kind of come together and really think this through. And I thought it was helpful, and I loved to see them coming together and the family kind of pushing the person that we support out into the front. It was great.
Great. So let's dive into the session details. I'm going to turn it over to Donne, who's going to walk us through a couple of the sessions, and then Cindy.
So yes, I am a Maryland Community of Practice statewide leader, and so I'm also a Maryland ambassador for the Life Course Framework, and also a certified coach for them as well. So I love to talk this through with families. I love to talk about what they see in themselves as the great, you know, benefits and what people love about them. So doing a one-page profile to me was like an honest and easy assessment for families to kind of say, take stock of where they are presently and to say, hey, this is who I am, this is where I am, this is what I need, and this right here will help me to kind of advocate for myself in this process. And it's a very specific process. We're just talking about moving out. However, it covers a lot of ground because the family also needs to be considered in that. What happens when I move out? What does mom and dad, do they need to continue to contribute? How will I afford to do all of this? So we used our profile tool that we use a lot at SEEC. We kind of adapted for different things, and this one was adapted for moving out. So on the left-hand side, you'll see Andy's one-page profile, and really just talks about who he is and what's important for him and what he needs to support him. It's a very simple thing to fill out, but it's very impactful because he gets to say for himself what things he loves about himself, what things he thinks are going to add value in this process. Maybe some things that you think are admirable about him, he may not think that. He may need you to share that with him. And so that's a really good conversation to have. Like, how often do you sit and kind of brag about yourself? Not very often. So I think it was really great for folks to take the time to do that and to really think about what are the things that I bring to the table that have added value in my family and my community for myself. And so we did that. Andy filled it out. I'll let Jean go through that part. And then I'll talk about the trajectory, which I use for myself. So I wanted to show people that, you use this for yourself in your daily life, and it can really bring about a lot of change. So I'll let you talk about Andy's profile and what that felt like for you all to go through that process with him, Jean.
So it was just really nice to put down on paper his skills, what makes him happy, what makes him tick, kind of, and have him share with us what's important to him. If he has a job and it's very important for him to keep his job, he has some nice friends, it's important for him to keep his friends. He's involved in Special Olympics and other organizations, and those are all things that are important to him and help build his happy life. So we included those on what's important, and then for how to be supported, he likes to have skills taught to him, and then support staff can fade away as needed. And he likes to be asked, what do you want? He likes to have a say in the direction of his life.
I love that. And it kind of just says, this is it. I mean, and you can add to it as well. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, and what Jean missed, which is like this big part of Andy that I always think about, is NASCAR, right? And you can't see in her little screen where she is right now. It's like it's all NASCAR all the time. I love it. So you it forces you to really get to the root of who that person is, which I think genuinely really helps us as a provider make sure that we're thinking about the story as well.
Yeah. So Steve alluded earlier about how in teaching this kind of framework, we used a couple of different modes. We kind of taught it to them, person to person on the call, but we also provided them with a recording so that they can go back, because sometimes it's a lot of information to kind of take in during a Zoom session. So I provided them with a recording about, really taking the time, like, what would you write about in this section? Pull out a dictionary, talk to someone, like interview your closest friend and say, hey, what are the things that you love about me? And if you're struggling with figuring any of these things out. And so I was able to do that because I've used it myself. I have 3 sons, one of whom has multiple disabilities, but we're always trying to figure out ways to make his life the best that it can be. And so I was able to pull from my own personal story to share with the families about how I use it in my own family. And so that's what you see on the right here is the trajectory of my son Asante, who is in 5th grade now, but he was in 4th grade then, and we were completing his IEP, and I just kept feeling like his voice wasn't really getting heard in the IEP. It was just about the goals and the outcomes and blah, 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 right? So boring. So, but at the same time, it's necessary, but it also needs to be customized to who that person is. And so using this trajectory, I was able to give that to his IEP team, and it ended up being a totally different experience than we've ever had in sharing. So I think it's really important that when you're providing information that, it's kind of going to help to convince someone or help to just inform them of who you are and what you want out of life. It's really, really powerful tool. So we were able to do that in session 1 for the families. And I thought we got really good, valuable information. And I felt like when in their sharing, we became kind of more gelled as a cohort. And it really was helpful to kind of get to know people in that way. Very good conversations. Next slide, please. So that's the same thing. I kind of just went through the trajectory here. Jean, could you tell us about the process with doing that with Andy, and how would you all come out with?
let me pull, I've got my sheets here. Basically, it was really good to look back over, what he liked in the past, what he wants to include for his future, what he didn't like in the past, and what he wants to have in his future. And again, just to write down, he wants to keep his job. He wants to continue to go to church. He wants to keep his friends. And
I think that's kind of where you got your kind of information about him not necessarily wanting to move out like this within those conversations that you were having. Right.
And his input is as to what he sees his next step as, knowing that, it's a step, right? So the next step is to, find you a space in our home, convert that. And it will be interesting to see as we return to normal times. I wouldn't be surprised if he begins to change his mind and say, okay, now I am ready to move out. As he meets up with more friends who have moved out of their parents' homes, I wouldn't be surprised if he then voices the request. It's like, oh, I'm ready now. I would like to move in, someplace in Rockville or whatever.
He certainly heard it a lot of times in our cohort, so he is kind of getting the bug in his ear, and he'll eventually get to that place. I think what's important here is that you do come out with a vision after you complete the homework, and the vision is not necessarily set in stone. It's not a stagnant vision. It's going to be something that you can come back to. So I was encouraging families to keep a vision, this trajectory with them, so that as they're having these conversations and things start to change, they could fill it out so that they could have even more of a robust vision for themselves. So I'm glad that Andy got to experience that and to kind of give us a kind of sense of what he wanted in his good life. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll jump in for a couple minutes here. In addition to a large focus on the life course framework tools that Donne just explained, we did a couple other things sort of in preparation and at the same time. One of the things we did in developing the vision and moving to recognizing everybody needs a circle of support, or a support circle as we refer to it. And part of that process is looking at, as you see in the picture, Andy's relationship map. And Jean can highlight that a little bit. But we spent a good bit of time talking with the participants, all the participants, about what do they see? How do they put people in their relationship map? And one of the interesting things, we had a lot of conversations about staff. Often paid staff were in the inner circle. And so we talked about staff and friends because many of the people said that their staff member was their friend. And what we came down to is really looking at, is it a friend? Because staff generally are paid, if staff are paid and they would remain in your life or remain in your life when they're not being paid, then that is truly that sense of friendship. And so to be careful with that, because we don't want to build entire support circles just around paid people. We really want to look at those natural supports, who else is in our life, and it doesn't have to be family. Sometimes it's the neighbor, sometimes it's Joe the grocer, and so we really spent some time talking about that. One of the other things you see in this picture as we looked at making some decisions, this is the moving out guide, and I will tell you, we went into this with the draft that I had referred to earlier from our background section. And while we wanted to give the cohort the completed moving out guide, we had to tell them up front they were part of us getting to the next step of refining and completing this moving out guide. So we were kind of doing both at once, sharing the guide with them, but using their information to continue. If you want to go to the next slide. This is just a sample of the kinds of things that we have in the guide. First and foremost is that big step that people are taking. And within some of these chapters, just the things we talked about, the developing the vision, exploring the ways of how to prepare. In some cases, people had the apartment or the condo or the house and then said, whoops, I need a lot of support. In other situations, we talked about, we don't know how far off this would be. It could be a couple years off, but these are the things you might want to have in place. So we can go to the next slide. Because one of the items in the moving out guide and in our sessions that we knew was going to be very important is, what the heck do we do about housing? Where do we find it? Where can we get some help? And instead of us putting that together ourselves, we went to what we consider the state guru to be at this point in housing resources. And Diane Dressler is it. And she not only helped us cut down a very extensive PowerPoint that she has, but she agreed to come on and conduct this session for the family. So we kind of got the information out of the horse's mouth instead of us having to summarize everything for her. So that was a very important session. So that's kind of where we are with some of the topics. We can go to the next slide.
Before we jump in, I was going to have a question for you, Jean. You got given a lot of information, right? You know, you got this moving out guide, you got all these resources, the appendices is a mile high. How did that feel, getting all of that? Was it just overwhelming, or was it in a format that you, at least, I can take a chunk of it, I can take a chunk of it, I can refer back to it? How did that feel?
I like having a lot of material ahead of time, and then I can go back and look at the pieces I need. So getting that housing resource it's very comforting, because I didn't know all the resources that were out there. So knowing there are more sources than I was aware of was very helpful. And with the thought that should only improve as we move along, and the state gets better at things and we all get better at things. I expect that to improve. So I like having that nice big thick guide and then refer back to the pieces that we need to go back to, and you know, and put it in small steps. I mean, that's the big thing. You're not going to tackle this all in one night, and it shouldn't be. You do your small steps to keep moving forward, and you do it at your own pace, because every family's different, every child is different. So you need to listen to your child, you look at your family needs, and do things at the pace that works for you and your family.
Next slide. Speaking of small steps, we took a lot of stock about where are we in this process. And so this integrated STAR, it kind of takes different categories of our lives and places, compartmentalizes them so we can think about them, you know, just in and of itself. So we took this tool and we actually broke it down even further and had like a current, like what we have right now. What are the personal strengths that we can tap into right now during this planning part of our lives if we're not already moved out? Because some people had moved out. So it's like thinking about where are we right now with our personal strengths and assets, and then what do we need to develop? Some people really did need to develop like some bravery and some confidence, like that's a small, not a small personality trait, but they needed to kind of build up those things within them. And so that could have been one of the things that they would put down as something to take stock of and into the future, and to be developing that habit or developing that character trait, excuse me. And as far as relationships, where do they see themselves needing more support when they move out? So currently you may only need mom and dad because you're living at home, right? But then in the future, if you're moving outside of the home, who do you need to tap into to help you to feel like you're building your community? And obviously eligibility specific things you'll need to take assessment of, which are more concrete, and we were able to provide some resources in our moving out guide that could kind of help families to think about the things that they needed to access that they weren't currently accessing, but they were eligible for. And also community-based organizations and other housing opportunities and other communities that they may not have known about that they could put into their future column. And then what we did was we put together an action plan. Like Jean was saying, you take a small step and you just work at it until you're done. And you definitely put a stamp on it, a timeline stamp on it, and you also find an accountability partner. So we did that with our crew and found small ways to kind of check in with them just to see, hey, no pressure, but where are you in the process? And I'll let Jean speak more to this because she might have something to tell you about what happened after they began to take some of those action steps.
So one of the big things that we felt Andy needed to do was to be able to cook better. If he's going to move out, he likes to eat. So we have been focusing more on his cooking skills. And he's been preparing most Sunday dinners that we have. He's getting better at looking in the freezer and looking in the pantry to see what he needs, picking the recipe that he wants to make. Being able to chop his own vegetables. And he's good at turning off the oven and the stove when he's done. But just a small steps to get moving in that direction. So that's been a big focus, and just to continue it with his skills at his own housekeeping skills. Making sure his room is clean and picked up, and doing his own laundry. He makes his own lunch every day that he takes to work, and he is looking forward to being able to ride public transportation once things get safe again.
And Jean, you mentioned this recently that I thought was just not necessarily moving out related, but also this independence growth about some medical appointments that you and Andy were working on too.
Right. So in this course frame, that did come up. How does your child deal with their own health care? And it was time for Andy to have some doctor appointments. I made the phone calls for him, but I did tell him that I would like him to go into the doctor's office on his own, and if I needed to help him out, I could. So he went to his dermatologist appointment. He took the copay in. He gave him his medical card, and he went back to visit the doctor on his own, and he was very comfortable doing that. He had another appointment. I needed to go in with him, but as we went through the visit, I told him the next time, pay attention to what's going on, because next time you should be able to do this on your own. And I think he will be able to. Yeah, so baby steps lead to bigger steps.
Absolutely.
Those are big steps to me.
Me too. He's doing great. I was really glad. It's good to hear the feedback too from families, because you just don't know exactly if the impact that you're making is happening, but with hearing about Andy's small steps, man, that's great.
The course makes parents stop and think. So whenever Andy is doing something, instead of me assuming I have to insert myself into every piece of this, now I stop and think, what do I have to do, and what does Andy need to do? Do I need to do anything, or can Andy get the ball rolling and I fill in the gaps behind him? But this has really made us stop and think, what is our role in whatever it is that he's doing, and to afford him as much independence as we can and build in the skills where he needs to have more skills built.
Love it.
Awesome. Can we go to the next slide? So Mary Anne, quick time check. We've probably got 5 minutes to wrap up, so we have time for Q&A.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
Perfect. This is very quick. Our session 6 was twofold. We had 3 veterans of moving out, families that shared their experience, and I think that was very beneficial to hear their different experiences, right? But also to know that it wasn't just, oh, this is magical and majestical and this is going to go well. There were bumps, and they worked through the bumps, and clearly the most important takeaway for me, and Jean can share in a little bit, was you work through the bumps. It's a collaboration, it's a partnership. You kind of work through these together, and you make sure that you have these trusted partners to go through that. So I thought that was important. The second half, because again, part of the grant was hearing back from people, we wanted a reflection, so we had a kind of group discussion with the cohort to hear back. Next slide. Just very quickly, there's a lot of bright colors and charts on here, but right at the bottom, I think the most important thing here is comfort with moving out. Green is prior, so people were kind of below average. 3 is the average on this scale. They were kind of like not sure. No, maybe I'm not sure. But afterwards, through the series, after with all the education materials, we got people above that average, 3.5, almost up to 4. So we know that we made an impact, and I think because of the tangibles we've heard from people directly like Jean, we know that we have got people moving forward. And in fact, of the 11 people that participated, 3 of them actually moved out in the middle of the series, which we didn't expect. But, you know, that's great. You know, other people, like Jean said, are going at different paces and going at this in their individualized and customized way. Next slide. I'm not going to read this all out because we've definitely heard from Jean, and I'm going to ask Jean to sort of give her some overview feedback. In here, she's specifically going into the smaller groups. We talked about the breakout. One thing, so the blue bubbles are the self-advocates, the green are the families. The one thing that I really loved from Donne was, I like how we keep on asking how we're doing so far. And it's just like, oh my gosh, that is so simple. Why don't we do that more? And not in a judgmental way and not in a competitive way, although there might have been some competition in the cohort, there might have been some, but just in a checking in, right? Just like majorly checking in. One of the things from a procedural perspective, Cindy, Donne, and I dedicated at least an hour every Tuesday at 1:30 each week to pull this together, because we knew we needed that focus. Sometimes it was 10 or 15 minutes, and sometimes I was late and we moved on or whatever. But we needed that time to check in, keep moving and moving forward. And I think, Jean, to your point, and I'm going to ask you to pitch in here, that checking in and that continuing the steps helped move along.
Right. You're always moving forward, and you're always you're sort of holding each other accountable. This is a worthwhile project, to be sure, but it was always good to check in and to get other people's viewpoints and to get other suggestions. As luck would have it, in my cohort, one of the parents had just recently done renovations in her home, so she could tell us what they did, how they did it, how their transition for their son to his new space went, and you know, that was just really helpful. And just to hear the possible stumbling blocks that other parents think they might experience for their kids. So some of our people are very outgoing and some are more shy. So making friends, keeping friends, how do you initiate friendships when they're in their own space or whatever? It was just interesting to share ideas and really support each other.
And another message I think in these bubbles that I really loved was from Janet. This course poked holes in my protective bubble, and that is a huge step forward. And I think we didn't even realize we were doing that, right? We just kind of assumed people were on the path, we're moving forward, but people were coming at this at different places, and that's okay. It was totally okay. Cindy, you want to take the next slide?
I can do that, and I'm not going to read all through this. I'm just going to summarize and some additional items that aren't on here. We do believe that the really structured but super relaxed environment really made a difference in whether we could be successful or not. Anyway, as Steve pointed out, we worked really hard on that because we always tried to figure out how to balance that, how to get the material across, but how to be very interactive and make everybody feel that we're all doing this together. And so I hope we succeeded with that. When we delivered it, the facilitators, the 3 of us and the family spent time talking and connecting between sessions. And I think that was brought up before. I would recommend that you continue, you know, any of us doing this, we continue to keep that as a key. Let's see, the materials, as Jean mentioned, there were a lot of materials. We felt it was important to give the participants, the people we support, as well as their family members, all the tools and materials that they could have, whether to use at that time or to go back on. So there's a good bit of detailed information. You have the moving out guide, plus you have a lot of appendices with some detailed stuff in it. With that, I would turn it to Jean just to say some lessons that we've talked about, but maybe, from a family perspective, what do you want us to learn from this?
Having a framework really helps you keep moving forward, and it really makes you pause and consider each step and find your strengths and find your gaps. And it's a real conversation starter. But having the forms to complete, we could put it down on paper. We can go back and refer to our conversations over and over again. And that was really, really helpful. And the way it was presented was very helpful. I like that you said you had the framework, but it was flexible, and that's exactly what it was. We knew we had information that we were sharing and learning, but having the small breakouts where, if we went off on a tangent for a little bit that was appropriate, that was just really, really helpful.
Which we did do sometimes. Thank you. Can go to the next slide.
And just very quickly, our goal was to learn, right? How to do this well, how to take individuals in various stages of kind of moving out and get them through a consistent series. So our goal is hopefully to share this more widely, like we're doing today, to team up with other initiatives that are going around the state. And this last one, I'm going to pitch back to you, Jean, because I know that there's some next steps for you that you've been working on.
Right. So we're in the process of finding Andy his space, and then he'll enjoy decorating his own space, and continuing to reconnect with his friends, because that's going to be a big part of our next steps, reconnecting socially. Without my husband and I, he has already said he wants to hop the bus and meet a friend for a movie and dinner. So that's a big thing for him to say. So this has definitely helped him to think forward and think more independently. And that's been a big help. And I think using this framework was excellent. It helps you to be organized, but begin your conversations now. Talk to your children about what they foresee for themselves, and then work together as a family to make things happen.
Well, with that, did you want to say one more thing, Steve?
No, that was the perfect ending. I shouldn't have even gone in there. Sorry.
It was perfect. It's perfect. And with that, before we take questions, I would just like to thank you for this brilliant presentation and the inspired work that you all have done. And I say inspired because, and Jean, you alluded to it in some of your initial comments that, as a family member, and as is true with so many families that I've worked with, our greatest fear is what will happen to our family member when we're no longer here. And as a result of that, it's a huge fear, and it's hard to wrap our head around that. And so we put it off. And Jean, you spoke about that. But what this does is it not only offers hope that this can be done, but really very practical steps, but steps that really speak to the whole person, and how do we move forward. So thank you, and so well done. And with that, for our attendees, Donna will be sharing this PowerPoint with you, and here are some resources that we have provided, and so you want to check those out. And then now I think we literally have 6 minutes. We'd like to take some questions, and we have Janet Furman, Director of Children's Services, with us, who has been monitoring those questions and will read them out to our panelists. Janet, welcome.
Hi, thank you. We had a couple questions here that asked if it would be possible to get a copy of the Moving Out Guide, or how they would be able to get a copy of that guide.
The Moving Out Guide we put together in concert with the grant from the Arc of Maryland. So I believe, and we're still working this out, the materials that will be packaged together in the Arc of Maryland will actually probably put it up onto their website. I still will find that out, but we'll get that information to you.
And
Thank
Steve,
you.
I'd only like to add that we would also probably be a point of contact if for some reason somebody would find it easier that way.
And to that point, Cindy, can we share your contact info, yours and
Yes,
Steve's and Donne's
absolutely.
contact information? Terrific. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question that asks, does SEEC offer the housing support waiver service as a standalone service?
Interesting question. We keep batting that one around and probably will request to be authorized to do so. We did not the first round this past year or so, but we are now finding out that it's something that we probably need to do because we know we can't.
Okay. If a child is approved for the Community Pathways waiver, should we still apply for Section 8 housing?
That's probably an excellent Diane Dressler and housing resource question. I'd be afraid that I'd give you the wrong information. So Mary Anne or Janet, maybe you can
Patricia.
Oh,
Yes,
hi,
and
Patricia.
I work with, yeah, the answer is yes. We want people to apply to all the possible vouchers as possible as you can. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have a question, will there be other sessions for families to participate in?
Well, so that's the $64 million question. You know, we are trying to figure out how to really package this very easily so more people can deliver this, right? So Cindy, Donne, and I can deliver it right now. We've got families that will definitely put their hand up to help as well. So repackaging it and then figuring out how to put it out there on a concerted basis is our next step. That is one of the things that we're working on. So once we've packaged it up well enough and we feel like we've got the right trainers to deliver it, we'll get that information out to people.
Our
Okay.
short answer probably is our intent is to do so. Just how and the when is what we're finishing right now.
With that, Jen, I think we can take 2 more questions and then we'll need to wrap it up.
Okay, so is there a format to connect families to possible roommates?
Boy, we've heard that question before. And actually, I think Patricia can jump in and help answer that question too, because that was a repeated question. How do we find roommates? And there's some standard answers, you know, such as who do you know, other people who receive supports that are looking for roommates, you know, asking your provider organizations who also know people that might be interested. But then there's advertising for, you know, whether it's college boards or whatever. We've had an awful lot of luck of people finding a housemate that of a graduate student or a student that's looking for a place to share. But I think, Patricia, you just mentioned that more and more websites are popping up that are actually trying to match people as potential housemates.
That is correct, yes. I'd be happy to share that with Mary Anne so she can share with the folks who participated in this session.
Great.
One more question?
I think that really we've gotten through most of them. There is one that asks, and this is for Patricia, I'm sure, is there a group of providers currently delivering the housing support services? And then how do we connect with those providers?
Sure, yes. Well, we do have a list of providers that offer this housing support. And we are working and making sure that it's updated in our website. But we do have a list. And then we also have a partnership between the Department of Disabilities and the Maryland Innovative Housing, who is also putting together for us what we call information about all the housing resources within Maryland, right? And I can't think of the word right now because I'm in blank, but like a clearinghouse of information for people with developmental disabilities and resources. And in that team, we work with the Department of Disabilities, Diane Rester, and Team Wings. So, you know, I don't know if you know, but one of our 5 cores at DDA is housing supports and supported living, and people live it independently. So we are trying to promote our housing support services within our waiver. We are trying to promote and work directly with the Housing Authority to make a more accessible and affordable housing with people with developmental disabilities. And so this is, I think, a beginning of a much needed ongoing conversation and supporting people to live on their own independent living, supported living.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patricia. And Janet, thank you for monitoring and asking the questions. So with that, I'd like to thank Steve, Donne, Cindy, and Jean once again for a wonderful presentation. And of course, thank Deputy Secretary Bernie Simons, Patricia, and Janet for making this possible. And I hope you'll join us. So in keeping with the theme, please join us on May 12th at noon for our webinar. The Department of Disabilities will be here with us to talk about the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Affordable Rental Housing Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities Initiative. So you'll want to if you're interested in housing, you'll want to join us for that as well. Until then, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Thank you.